1 in 3 people, actually much more than that if we're talking about young people, feel so much stress that they say most days they're completely overwhelmed. And I used to be one of those people every day of my life. And a lot of what they tell you to do about that, breathe, talk to someone about it. It wasn't even close to helping fix it. So just about everyone has lost at least some of their power to focus during the last decade, and especially during the pandemic. It can feel much harder to feel alert and peaceful inside and to get things done. If you have this, you know how demoralizing it is when you're trying and trying, but all your intentions for the day just keep getting squishy and they evaporate, and it feels bad, right? You're full of potential and you'd love to connect with good friends or find a partner or enjoy the partner you already have, and you want to be working towards things that matter, but you just keep filling up with overwhelm. Too many things are going on, too many demands on your attention, too many hardships and hurtful experiences keep coming at you, and what can happen is you just shut down. It's too much. You can't solve problems, and so they pile up. And pretty soon, you can't help but feel depressed and exhausted and hopeless that anything can change. Don't worry though, that is the overwhelm talking. And I know a lot of you are dealing with some very hard things right now, and you're trying your best to soldier on, shake it off like other people do. But this is what's important to know. When you get stressed, it triggers something that other people don't have. We have a stress response that's this big. A lot of people whose blogs you're reading and podcasts you're hearing, their stress response is like this. And so they're telling you, it's simple, just be kind to yourself, breathe, take a bath, talk to people about it, it'll go away. And though those are all good things, I don't think you should not do those things. But for us, for that level of stress that we're carrying, it's not enough. So there's an extra element that we need to heal that most people don't know about, and it's neurological dysregulation. And that's when your nervous system, which governs everything in your body and shapes your thoughts and your feelings, it can't quite keep up with all this input of stimuli. You hear a big noise and your nervous system goes slightly out of whack. That's dysregulation. And when it's happening, you might space out or feel numb or emotionally overreact to people, or maybe your thoughts are just flying through your mind at 90 miles a minute and you go into full flight or fight response, right? Just because you heard a noise or just because you're hurrying to get to work on time. Hurrying can be a big trigger for traumatized people, in fact. Talk about overwhelm. Trauma can predispose you to get neurologically dysregulated when anything stressful happens. Someone raises their voice at you, or you lose your job, and it's like a switch gets flipped. You can almost feel it running through you like a wave. It's dysregulation, and it causes overwhelm. Your powers of perception get very cluttered, and you can't tell if someone has harmed you or if maybe you're just overreacting. Or your emotions are going into overdrive and you say things that you don't mean, or you just go blank. Have you ever done that? When you're in this state, it's almost certain that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to lose track of your boundaries. You're going to lose your focus. Your physical energy drops way down right when you need energy and boundaries and focus to deal with the problem at hand. But what happens, all this hectic input right here, drains you right here. That's overwhelm. Oh, you go high with it, you go low with it. And with productivity, you get frantic, then you crash. With emotions, you blow up at people, and then you fill with despair. And then in your body, your stress response is just going and going and going and running you into the ground. And this is why a history of trauma is closely correlated with just about every health problem there is. Chronic back pain, migraines, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disorders. Your body and your thoughts and your feelings are just overwhelmed, and they can't do what they're meant to do. So I'm guessing you probably didn't know dysregulation is a thing, and you thought that you struggled because somehow you just failed to handle life like everyone else. Well, you didn't fail. We're not like everyone else. We get dysregulated easily, those of us who had childhood trauma. You can't even feel all the ways that it's happening when it does. Some things, yes, but a lot you can't feel. So no wonder there's so much going on, so much info coming in. It makes you feel overwhelmed. Now, the people who tried to help me back when I was younger were showing me what worked for them, and assuming if it didn't help me, I was being difficult or dense, or maybe I just didn't want to heal, or they thought I was crazy maybe. And what they didn't know, because nobody knew until fairly recently, that what's going on in a lot of people, especially people with past trauma, is nervous system dysregulation. Even when life is easy, we get overwhelmed, right? And then you're overwhelmed all the time, and that causes life to get harder, and you end up with a lot of problems around relationships and health and family and work and money. And then these problems start compounding the overwhelm that you already have in your nervous system, and it gets even worse. But don't worry, just knowing the signs that you're dysregulated can help you. You can say to yourself, oops, I'm feeling overwhelmed. This must be dysregulation. Just naming it can take, half of the pressure off you when it's happening. Half is a lot. Like, you can probably manage that much overwhelm, right? And you can then notice how overwhelm shows up in you, so you can work on a plan to bring that level of overwhelm down. So what are the signs that you're overwhelmed? Okay, here are some. Racing thoughts, difficulty solving problems, completing tasks, excessive anger, from snapping at people to actually raging at them, feeling a sense of urgency even when there isn't any, having ADHD type symptoms. You can't focus, you can't complete tasks, always putting out fires with a loss of ability to see the big picture. You're just running from emergency to emergency to emergency. And that leads to another sign that you're overwhelmed, which is you're chronically amped up. You're feeling the adrenaline. You're maybe even getting addicted to it. Alternatively, you can't get off the couch, right? You're just down and depressed and unmotivated. Procrastinating and avoidance are signs of overwhelm. Feeling chronically exhausted. The feeling of being defeated and hopeless, that's often part of it. Digestive distress, like both ends not going well. Headaches, chronic pain with little known origin. Getting sick easily. Attempting to escape, just like going into fantasy or running away without telling anybody where you're going, not ghosting people, that's escaping through, or you could be also escaping through unhealthy self-soothing behaviors, eating, drugs, drinking, that kind of thing. Surrendering boundaries easily, that's a really dangerous one. There's high consequences to that one. Withdrawing from social interactions, having dark thoughts and pessimism, losing your interest in things you used to enjoy, and a growing sense of shame about your overwhelmed behavior. Now, before I understood overwhelm and dysregulation and CPTSD, I was carrying a lot of shame because I couldn't understand why I was always so frantic and always seemed to have so much drama in my life. And I get it now. And I totally forgive myself, because the fact is I was carrying a lot of trauma from abuse and neglect in my childhood, and then from living my life in a dysregulated way for a lot of years. I didn't know. And the information I got from my doctor and therapist was off base. And if I hadn't figured out on my own how to heal dysregulation, I might not even be here right now. So here's my first secret for healing overwhelm. If there is not a genuine crisis demanding frantic action from you right now, your overwhelm is probably because you have trouble processing all the inputs, the noises, the bright lights, the bad fears, the worries about money, a bunch of people talking to you at the same time. I have that. I get very overwhelmed by that. These are what I call inputs, and they can add up so that they are just too much for your easily overstimulated nervous system. Now, when you're not dysregulated, you're probably pretty good at dealing with noises and stressful experiences. You see them, you feel them, and then they move downstream into the memory bucket. You remember that they happened, but you're not at the effect of these experiences. But trauma in your past can leave you prone to getting dysregulated. It happens more easily to us, and it can last longer and be harder to come back out of, which can block that downstream movement of our thoughts and experiences. You're thinking about them that day, and then they go down. The emotions and the thoughts from yesterday and the day before, they're banging around, they can't get downstream, and it just becomes too much. And this produces a feeling of overwhelm. Now again, not all overwhelm is because you're dysregulated. Life gets genuinely overwhelming sometimes. We lose our job, there's a natural disaster, a relationship ends, we find out we're seriously ill. But think about it, even in those situations, you're going to need to seek help and deal with your other responsibilities and take care of yourself and put one foot in front of the other. And all that is very hard to do when you're dysregulated and in a state of overwhelm. So it's a vicious circle. Stress makes you overwhelmed. Overwhelm keeps you from solving the problems that are causing stress. The inputs are jamming up in your nervous system, and your nervous system just gives up. It tips over into dysregulation. I do sometimes still get dysregulated, and I notice that it kind of spreads like a blob of ink in water. I can feel it running through my body, sort of like a migraine starting. It does feel like that. And you can't stop it. Like once you're aware that it's begun, you can't really stop it. But here's the good news. You can learn to re-regulate. And when you do this, you can quickly recover some of your cognitive powers and your emotional equilibrium, so you don't lash out, you don't destroy relationships while you're having a feeling. You can just be normal and have a normal amount of, we'll call it whelmed. You're just whelmed, but not overwhelmed. The silver lining here is that because dysregulation can overwhelm virtually every part of you, the solution can also begin in any part of you, anywhere, wherever you see the opportunity. You don't have to solve things in the right order. You don't have to solve all your problems at once. You don't have to love yourself first. You don't have to lose weight first, or have a job first, or feel better first. You don't even have to see a therapist first. You can start coming out of overwhelm today, and from where you are, just start feeling better. Here are some things you can try. Think about all the inputs, the stimuli that sometimes feel like too much for your senses. Is it going to parties? Is it loud noises? Is it multiple people talking at once? You don't have to avoid these triggers to control them. Just acknowledging them can help you detach a little bit when you start to feel overwhelmed. And you can remind yourself, yeah, there's a lot of noise in here in this room, and it's making me feel a bit overwhelmed. And sometimes just doing that, it's enough, noticing it, that the overwhelm begins to subside. Also, when you're overstimulated, you can take a short break from sensory input, wearing comfortable clothes. You can dim the lights or turn them out. You can turn off your phone or put it in another room. You can extend this little break into a full hour or a full day when you need a fast from your full load of inputs. You just want to give your nervous system a rest. If you're driving, try not listening to music or podcasts or talking of any kind. Just focus on driving and see if that doesn't help you stay calmer inside. When you're walking, try not using headphones or AirPods to stay stimulated. The walk is stimulation enough, and you'll find that the world lights up for you when you don't have a lot of competing stimulation coming in here. Walking is also very re-regulating, just a positive thing to do all around, especially outside. When you meditate, if you do, try just resting. You could focus on breath, you could use a mantra, but I recommend while you're trying to bring your inputs down, don't use recorded music or guided meditations where someone's talking. You don't really need to push yourself along there. Sometimes when you're overwhelmed, what you just need is rest. You can also try not speaking your agitated thoughts. Talking about trauma and things that make you angry or sad or worried can actually be triggering. Sometimes what you need more than talking about it is just to feel supported and connected. That's often what we're reaching for when we talk. And being supported and connected doesn't depend on you voicing the distress in detail. When I talk about bad things while I'm overwhelmed, I can get very negative. I can really sort of lose my bearings and just think, this world it's just so terrible, everything's so bad. Almost like I'm hypnotized. And it works against what I'm trying to do, which is to come back to present time, where I can feel myself, I see my options, and I take good actions that are in, my best interest. Now, if you haven't tried my daily practice techniques, it is a structured way to express and release the distress that you have in here, and then give your nervous system some rest and recovery and meditation. That's totally what it's for. And a lot of people with trauma find meditation really hard, right? Because our minds are so chattery. So with my techniques, you write and ask to release these fearful, resentful thoughts before you meditate. And this releases a lot of the chatter so that you get a little more peace when you do meditate. Writing helps the meditation, and then when you meditate and rest your mind, it helps you sustain your writing practice. Because if you're facing all that fear and resentment, it might feel good while you're doing it, but if you're not getting that mental rest afterwards, I've just seen it over and over again. People get overwhelmed. It's just too much is moving through you. And so you take a rest afterwards. You're healing up all those rough spots that you were releasing when you were doing the writing. Now, if you want to try the daily practice, it's linked down below in the description section and on my website at crappychildhoodfairy.com. Staying regulated and reducing overwhelm is more of a way of life than a quick fix. But there are benefits that you can start feeling today from even putting your toe in and taking some small actions. You'll start feeling better, and the little changes you make add up, and they become big changes over time. It may seem like your problems are so big that it doesn't matter what little things you do. People say that all the time. I've been in that place. But remember this, when your nervous system is regulated more of the time, there are fewer problems that can even get into your life. You'll just start being able to see the red flags in people before you let them in. And you're not putting out fires because you're not letting fires start anymore. So every day, life gets a little gentler, a little easier, there's a little more space. You're able to go even further in your healing, solving your problems, taking your next right action, growing your capacity to feel connected with other people, and then finding that power inside you to be yourself and bring to the world what only you can. It helps to learn the signs of dysregulation and quick steps that you can take to get re-regulated. Studies show that people with a lot of clutter around their homes have a higher than average rate of anxiety, depression, social isolation, and ADHD-like symptoms. But here's what bugs me about these studies. They assume that all these symptoms are caused by clutter, and therefore, if you clean up the clutter, you won't be depressed and stuck anymore. You'll be happier, more focused, more connected to other people. And honestly, there's some truth to this. But that doesn't mean that clutter is the main cause of those problems. I'm going to put a bold hypothesis out here, and that's that clutter is just one more symptom of trauma alongside depression, anxiety, isolation, and so on. But it's not the direct cause of those symptoms. Now, we know that trauma affects people neurologically, and that means your brain, your physiology, your feelings, and your behavior patterns. Now, trauma can make people compulsive. It can fill your thinking with stressful thoughts. It can make you feel immobilized and unproductive. It does something to your neurology that is quite often expressed as cluttering behaviors, accumulating stuff that you don't need and piling it up around your living space or working space, intending to get organized at some point in the future, but not having the inner power to do that. And I think cluttering behavior is a trauma-driven version of something normal and natural that we call nesting behavior. And nesting, that's setting up your home space, making it comfortable and warm and orderly and well-stocked, which is a good and natural instinct. But like all good instincts, trauma can push this one over the line into something over the top. And that's what cluttering is, that good instinct at an amplified level that makes it not good, that is caused by and causes a feeling of overwhelm and inability to get organized or to take action by cleaning up your stuff. So you have too much food and some of it is rotting, or too many jackets, or giant stacks of papers you've been meaning to go through, or you can't find your toolbox because you left it lying around and then other stuff got piled up on top of it, that kind of thing. So that's what I mean when I say I have my own hypothesis, and it kind of goes against the research. Because while researchers assume that the symptoms that go along with clutter are the cause of clutter, I believe that clutter is more like a fellow symptom. Trauma causes all of them: depression, anxiety, lack of mental focus, and clutter. Does that feel true to you? Well, wherever it comes from. I think these symptoms interact with each other, and that's why when you're healing trauma, I don't believe that you have to always start with the root cause of the trauma. You can start anywhere in your symptoms where you feel enough inner power to take some action. So are you ready to throw out the old vegetables in the fridge and clean out those icky drawers? That's a great place to start. Do you have a couple of hours available to organize all your unsorted papers into separate stacks of, trash, file, and do something about? That's also a great idea. And you know what? Both of those actions would almost certainly lift your mood and improve your ability to focus. Decluttering is a powerful re-regulation exercise with very good fringe benefits of, like, your bills get paid. But in my experience, you're always going to need to be healing your dysregulation symptoms to even find that inner power to do any decluttering at all. Because that's the problem, right? You know you should declutter, but you have a lack of power to do it. Not doing it makes all the other problems in your life a little worse. Now, hoarding is like a separate thing, and it's harder to change, and I'm not really talking about that here today, but in that one, it's not only is there a lack of power, but there can also be a distortion in the thinking that it needs to be done. It just seems like, no, everything as it is terribly important. So I'm distinguishing clutter as like, no, you agree it's a problem. I wish I didn't have all this stuff piled up. I can't find my keys. So you agree it's a problem. It's a lack of power. So getting that inner power moving and accessing it, that's how you're going to be able to declutter. And with that power moving, activated in you, you'll also find that your emotions get lighter, your mind is more focused, you feel calmer, and you feel more open to new experiences and letting people into your life. I mean, have you ever had that? It kind of goes together. Clutter is a huge problem for a lot of people who had childhood trauma. And it's not just the physical space and belongings that could be called clutter, right? People with CPTSD also experience mental clutter. Too much on your mind, all in a jumble, can't focus or read situations because it's like the bag of cats in there. And then there's emotional clutter where your feelings are popping up everywhere, some of them from so long ago you don't even know where they're coming from, but you have a debilitating reaction to them that's totally getting in your way. And there's also relationship clutter where the people are in your life, they're a mix of people who are good to have in your life and people who maybe should not be in your life anymore. And finally, there's time clutter, where you're overbooked, you're not prioritizing, you're getting swept away in things that feel urgent and ignoring things that are actually important. And I'm going to talk about all of these because they're all common with childhood PTSD, and they can all improve when you have the power to change even one of them. When you learn to detect and heal neurological dysregulation that's caused by trauma, this in turn causes so many other trauma symptoms, including the ones that trigger your tendency to stay cluttered, whether it's your calendar, your file cabinet, the floor of your car, whatever. Having space and order. I mean, doesn't that sound good? When you can practice noticing your neurological dysregulation, which is a common trauma symptom, and learning to master re-regulation, the clutter of all kinds starts to settle down. And there's a wonderful feeling of peace and possibility that can come into your life. And that's another source where that well, where your inner power comes from, it begins to fill up because there's peace, there's visual space around you, and there's time. So let's start with physical clutter. And I'm talking about belongings just strewn around your physical space, in your house, in your yard, in your car, in the place where you work. And it's visually chaotic. It's full of things that you don't actually use or need, and that makes it hard to find what you do need. Like, do you keep huge boxes or racks of multiple sizes of clothes in case you lose weight or gain weight, even though the clothes that don't fit now are old and out of style? And do the clothes that fit you right now have a good place to live in a closet with enough hangers or enough drawer space where clothes are clean and ready to wear, right? Am I nailing you about something? This multiple sizes of clothes is totally a thing with people who struggle with their weight. That you never really know, like what size, sometimes it'll come down for a while, it goes back up. And that's one of the beautiful things when order comes into your life around food, and it can be a long time coming. This is the thing that goes along with trauma quite a lot, like sort of clutter of the food, clutter of what you choose to eat and what you have available to yourself. But then that has this effect on clothes. And it can mean lots of boxes and cramming in closets, and then a weird whole segments of your closet that are sort of shame portions, clothes you can't get into. And what you can do with clothes that don't fit right now is you can put them away. It's okay to put them away, but put them in a way in a stored fashion and not just piled up everywhere and trying to figure it out. And every time you try something that's the wrong size, you feel bad about yourself. Like, why do that to yourself? Do you pick things up at thrift stores or left on the street? Like where I live in Berkeley, that's customary. Like even in fancy neighborhoods, when people have something that still has use, they put it out on the street. And so yesterday, or the day before, I was taking a walk and somebody had put out a bunch of, they put out like a plastic thing with different silverware. There must have been 30 knives, 30 forks, like the whole thing. And actually a year ago, we were really short. We have a lot of big potlucks and things, and we were short on having enough silverware. And so I bought some. I got some at Costco. It was cheap. We have abundant silverware, but it's like this leftover feeling like we don't have enough. I picked it up off the street and I'm holding it because I have adult sons, right? And I'm like, well, maybe as they go out on their own, they're going to need silverware. I don't know. But my husband's like, you did it again. You did it again. I grew up very poor and we often didn't have enough, and it's really hard for me to walk past stuff that's on the street being given away for free without thinking, I don't need this right now, but I could, and what if I did, and I should have this now, and then it becomes clutter. And so, I'm lucky that I have this giant garage that I can put stuff that I don't really use in, but every year or 6 months, I have to go in there and start putting stuff back out on the street. And it's almost like a funny thing in my family. It's a tendency I have that's definitely a legacy of some trauma from when I was little. So it's actually like a healthy, nice feeling for me when I gather up stuff and I do put it back out on the street. Like it makes me feel good that somebody else is going to use it. It always gets taken again by some of their poor sap who has this thing that I have. I don't know, I might need 100 pieces of silverware in the future. Or it can also be nice to donate stuff. You can donate it to Goodwill, and if the stuff is decent, you get to add up the math with fair market value, and that's a tax deduction if you itemize your taxes. So one thing that holds people up is the feeling that these things could be sold. So, we have some broken bikes in the garage and we think, oh, well, we should sell them. If we fixed them up, they would be worth X and it would cost this much to fix them, and nobody ever fixes them. That's what it is. So if you are in a situation where you have the power to sell things, I know people with really bustling businesses on Craigslist or eBay, selling things, and maybe they go around and they actually collect stuff productively and sell them and make some money that way. Well, that's lovely. If you're not somebody who has the level of organization and power to do that, it would be better to give away the broken bike or to donate it. And so a rule of thumb is it just depends on how much money you have. But let's say that you could replace something for $20 and you're not using it right now, go ahead and give it away, because if you can replace it for $20, if you have a little more money, you could put the line at $50. If you could replace this thing for $50, but you're not using it right now, go ahead. So a bike is more than that, right? A used bike is, $500 or something. That's a lot of money. So then it's time to use a productivity method to write down some things you're actually going to deal with and give yourself a timeline. You go, I'm going to get this bike repaired. And the bike repair costs whatever, $60, and then you put it on Craigslist and sell it for whatever, a few $100s. And then you have the money, and that's satisfying, and I would like everybody to have that money. Everybody's happy, somebody has a bike and the bike is fixed and everything's going really well. But it's just realistically, can you do that? So another arrangement you can do is to partner up with somebody who is willing to help you, and you split the proceeds from these endeavors. And sometimes people who, they're looking for a little extra work, they would be happy to do this with you, but you still have to put the effort out to make that arrangement with them. So I'm just saying, sometimes the best way to get rid of the clutter is to give it away. It's still going to be valued by somebody. It's still going to be useful in the world. It's just that you're not going to have the cash. All right, so another thing, is your cupboard full of cans and containers of things that have been sitting there for more than a year? So cans do last a while. I understand. I was hungry a lot when I was growing up. We had times when we really did have nothing to eat. And so it's just been this tendency that started when I first started having my own money and my own place to live. I would way overbuy food. And it was stuff I was never going to eat. But I loved the feeling of cupboards that were completely full and had stacks of things. Like that gave me this feeling of peace and security. But the fact of the matter is right now, I don't need to have all that food in the cupboard because I have some money in savings and I could go buy it at the store at any time. Now, if hard times befell me, like at the beginning of lockdown, when we all thought, oh my gosh, there's going to be these food shortages, we're all going to starve. We were thinking, we're like, well, we live near a creek, we'll have water. And then I bought like cases and cases of tuna and chicken and green beans and corn and all this stuff that, we've barely made a dent in 3 years later. And it's time for me to give some of it to the food pantry because it's good food and people will be glad to have it, but we just need to distribute it where it's actually needed and going to get eaten. Even cans have their sort of sell-by dates, right? So that's something I'm actually really looking forward to. And I'll have more shelf space, and even if the shelves sit empty, that's fine. I personally, because I get so dysregulated by visual clutter, like seeing a shelf that has a little space between items, is actually very re-regulating for me and stimulates my imagination and my sense of being productive. It does. Do you have that? Do you have cars that don't work? God forbid. Are they on the front yard? Well, I grew up like that. And I was really embarrassed and ashamed about it. And it was just, my parents were going through a lot. They did not have power to deal with it. But yes, there was a broken car in the front yard for years. There was a wall between the living room and the garage that had been broken through, these bricks with a big jagged hole in it that was also there for years, and that we used that for a doorway, turned the garage into a bedroom. But as a teenager, it took me a while to understand what was going on in my family was alcoholism. Alcoholism just sucks away all that tidying energy, and this clutter was everywhere in the house. There were thick layers of dust, there was rotten food, and it made me really ashamed for people to come home. And so my husband had a car that didn't work. He went ahead and bought another one thinking he'd sell the old one, and then 2 years passed or more. Eventually he sold the car. So good news, he eventually sold the car, but it got covered with leaves. The neighbors began to complain. The city came and was putting tags on the car. And it was really this huge source of old shame. Well, there was I think some of it was legitimate present day shame, but this old childhood thing about being like the most screwed up family on the block. And the neighbors themselves were complaining. It was, it was beyond even my standards. And that level of clutter to me, it made it feel like we also were counting on having the money from that car, and we had a plan for that money, and we couldn't go forward with the plan for the money because we didn't have the money because we had this car, and we kept paying registration on it. And that kind of thing was very demoralizing to me. A lot of my healing from complex PTSD has to do with getting competency and mastery over managing life in these areas that were not totally together when I was a kid. Like I always have car insurance. I always see the dentist every 6 months. Even when I was a single mom and it had to go on my 3rd credit card, I took my kids to the dentist all the time. When I was a kid, I had very rotten teeth. And finally, a relative stepped in and paid for me to have like huge amounts of dental work when I was like 8. I had to have like 4 crowns by the time I was 8 because nobody was brushing my teeth, And so that's a thing that's always helped me feel like life is okay, life is together. Now, a car is a great example of something that's hard. Sometimes decluttering has this series of steps. And when you have CPTSD and you're having trouble holding your focus, and a task involves a whole series of steps, right? That can be very hard for a person with CPTSD. And this is where having a whiteboard or a digital online, like I use this thing called Kanban flow. I'm always telling people Kanban, and I make a list that I look at every day multiple times, and I delete things that I complete or move them into a done column. But you can create a little task and then click and drag it to these different columns and name them what you want. You can color code them. And so the steps involved with selling a car, right? You have to get it like detailed and super clean, and then you have to make sure it runs and that the tires are full, and you have to know where the keys are for all of this. And this is not always, if you're very cluttered, knowing where the keys are is a problem. And if you don't have keys, you have to get the keys made. You have to have the paperwork and the title ready to sign over. So all of that can be so daunting and overwhelming that you can never do it. I know exactly why we get cluttered and why CPTSD is correlated with this. Like, it's just too much if you're very dysregulated. So this is another case of sometimes the easy way out is to donate. And obviously, if your car has great value, you still want the money. But my family's done this before when we had a car that was kind of a clunker and we couldn't deal with all the steps. We donated it, and they just come and take it. And they take it even if you don't have the paperwork, even if it doesn't run. There's somebody who wants that car. And that's really helpful to a person like me who can get overwhelmed and everything gets stuck and I can't plan anything unless I solve the problems right in front of my face. Toiletries. Let's talk about toiletries. So a few months ago, I bought some good makeup. I've talked about that here before. It was such a big deal in my life. Finally, I've got like really good makeup. I'm wearing it now. How do you like it, right? But I used to have just like the very cheapest stuff from Walgreens. Like, I was putting stuff on my eyes that wouldn't even stay on my eyes, and it was $5 and little splinters were getting in my eyes, and it probably causes cancer. I don't know. It's what I had and it's what I was used to, and it comes from growing up poor. But I'm at a point in my life where having the makeup be together and look nice and kind of stay on my eyes and not go running down is important to me. So I hired an expert. And her name is Maria Riley. She's a makeup artist, and I had hired her for professional video shoots that I used to run before, but I hired her just for me. And she came and helped me, and she showed me, she told me what to buy and what makeup to get, and she taught me how to apply the makeup. And it was this really great day. It was kind of stressful, and it just was a lot to learn for me. I never really knew, I airbrush my face with foundation. Yeah, right? I didn't even know you could airbrush foundation onto your face, but it just looks better, and I don't know, it looks great. So I have a little airbrush, and I have these little pods, and, I have to maintain it all. I have to wash my brushes, and it's this whole thing. But when Maria was sitting with me showing me this, she said, first, get out everything that you have right now. And so I showed her all my makeup, and she was so cool and non-judgmental about my crappy old stuff. She's like, this nail polish, I can't open it. I'm like, oh yeah, I bought that in 1999 to put my kid's initial on his toothbrush. It's a long time ago, and it doesn't open anymore. And she said, okay, well, anything that's old and not usable anymore, you can just throw out. There was some stuff that was old and you could still use it, but now I had a new, better version of it, but it was halfway used makeup. And I was like, what can we do with this? Can we give it to somebody? She was like, no, you can't give old makeup to people. Throw it out. And so, this part of me that's so thrifty, I can't stand throwing things out. I got used to it. It's like, I have better stuff now. I don't need this anymore. I'm truly not going to use it anymore. And nobody else wants my 15-year-old bronzer, and they definitely don't want my 2-year-old mascara that's kind of dried out, They don't want it. It's unsanitary, and you just throw it out. So that was kind of freeing for me. And I noticed that a little bit of hoarding style was there, that I had an emotional attachment. This was the makeup from 20 years ago. I was young back then. I had little babies. I was a new mom. And by throwing out the stuff that belonged to me at that time, and likewise with the pants I'm never going to fit into again, it just was this idea of a time that I could go back to. And I had to get it into my mind that it's okay It's okay to get rid of the belongings of that time, because the way that we can revisit those times is looking at pictures, having memories, or really just living in the present and having a good time now. There's so many ways, for example, that I'm more like a young person in my life now, in that I'm lighter hearted. I feel more free spirited. I can have fun at a party. I don't sit there just like sour, feeling like everybody hates me. Like, I'm kind of younger than I've ever been. So it's okay, not to have the belongings anymore. And I'm telling you, the pants from like 1999 and with the big bell bottoms and stuff, I don't even want them anymore. I can't button them. So, so it's all good. So those I donated. And, God help the people who actually want to wear those old pants, but maybe they do. And I just trust that Goodwill will sort it all out, and whatever should be recycled as fabric, they're going to take care of it, and I can stop grieving it or anything. But it's out of my closet. Whether it's sentimentality or fear of that you'll be in lack in the future, or feeling done with it, but not having the inner power to, just make the time and put it on your schedule and do it. Power is what you need. Whatever the step that you need to take is, the thing that's going to propel you into that step is inner power. So I'm going to talk about how to get that inner power within this video, but I just want to cover clutter a little more. So let's go over the other dimensions of clutter that hold you back and keep you from feeling open to life and ready for good things to come in. All right. One of them is mental clutter. One thing I can say from my own experience of childhood PTSD is the stuff that I'm holding in my mind can get very crowded. And I'm sure there's some sort of problem with trauma that makes thoughts and ideas, harder to sort and remember and process in a good way, to move them along. And that clutter of the mind there, it makes it hard to focus. It makes it hard to prioritize things appropriately. And it makes it hard for me to notice that I have choices when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like the world gets very small. Like I'm just like, I'm so overwhelmed, there's nothing I can do. And then I bring that dysregulation down and the choices open back up again. So I rely heavily on to-do lists, timers, and calendars so that I can predict when I'm clear-headed what I need to be doing each day and then write down a plan. Now, I know not everybody is a planner. I am a planner. Plans help me get stuff out of my mind. I know if I write it down, I don't have to keep reminding myself, don't forget, drop the rent. Now, I don't always stick to my plan. In fact, I almost never stick entirely to my plan because my plans are a little too ambitious. But I don't have to waste time throughout the day trying to figure out what I need to do next. I've already put them in ranked order priority of what I'm going to do. And I declutter my mind twice a day by doing my daily practice techniques, which helps me move, fearful, resentful thoughts out of my mind and onto paper so that I have more of my mind available to actually think and envision things and do things. And there's a link to my daily practice course down in the description section of this video and all my videos if you want to try it. It's free. Anybody can try it. And that's one way to find out if it helps you too to clear your mind, is give it a try. Okay, then there's emotional clutter. And mostly by this, I mean old beliefs and resentments that once were true that you've been telling yourself and telling other people way past the expiration date. Like, did a boyfriend in high school make out with your best friend? Well, that happened to me. I only found out about it from the friend when I was an adult, and I had a good hard cry about it for 10 minutes, and I was really sad. And then for about 4 months, I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't let it go. I was really resentful. Eventually, the friendship with the friend fell apart, not because of this directly, but I think that when the truth of the relationship came out, I don't know, it just didn't hold. We've been friends a long time. But what she did, I did think a little less of her, even though it was so long ago. I mean, it was literally back in the 70s. And we did drift apart. But now, because of my daily practice, the emotions about it are just like, they're not there. I have no tears about it at all. Like, I remember it. It's a fact, but I'm not carrying this emotional clutter, this resentment at her, or this victimization like, oh, it could have been so great with this boyfriend if she hadn't come along. I have no illusions about that. sometimes the hurtful things that happen are an indicator of the instability and ungoodness of the things in your life, the relationships in your life. And so we get emotionally cluttered sometimes when we hold on with that sort of shoulda, coulda, woulda thinking, or, they owe me an apologize. I can't let this go until they apologize. So we're sort of freezing stuff in amber emotionally, and it becomes an identity, right? And these are some of the phases I've had to go through sometimes in healing. Like, it was really healing for me at a certain point to go, you know what I am? I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. And that was like my whole thing for a while. And gradually I did a lot of healing around that and the things that go with that. And I also noticed that there's stuff going on with me that's a problem that has nothing to do with that. And to solve those problems, it helped me to free up and start going, I'm a person who has a lot of things. I've had some hard things. I've had some advantages. I will always be an adult child of an alcoholic, but that is so not my primary identity anymore. I'm a person with complex PTSD, but I'm always telling people, your trauma is an injury, but it's not an identity. It's not what you are. And so carrying all this stuff, like this terrible stuff happened, I can never change. There are a few problems in life that actually can't be changed, right? One example I use is losing a limb. You cannot get another limb, but you can get a workaround. You can often get a prosthetic that will help you do many things, and your life can continue to blossom anyway. And so that is an uncluttered approach to dealing with life's hardship, is not to carry it around forever. Like, it's always going to take some time to deal with the grief and sadness and disappointment and anger of what has happened. But soon, with healthy healing, it gets moved down the conveyor belt, down into the past. Space opens up again for new experiences, new relationships, and yes, new heartaches, new ones. Life goes on. Emotional clutter also comes in the form of seeking out social media people you're obsessed with, or seeking out news about things that make you angry. Like, anger is the drug, like being different than, better than, disagreeing with, hateful towards some other kind of person. And that's a drug, and that is clutter. Outrage is total emotional clutter. If the news you read isn't helping you be informed so that you can be more useful, it's clutter, all right? It's emotional clutter, and it's probably making you sick, and it's probably getting passed on to other people and making their world difficult. I really urge you to pay attention and prioritize what is useful. So just like you would go through a drawer and keep the jeans that you still wear and get rid of the ones that you're never going to wear, when you're consuming media, what is the stuff that's actually useful to you, like necessary for your job or truly entertaining and uplifting for you? Great. I'm all for people being informed, but we are so far beyond like being informed anymore with the level of information that is designed to agitate us and clutter us up emotionally. And the consequence of that is a lot of division and isolation. And trust me, as a traumatized person, you don't need extra of that. So if your media consumption is causing you to feel separate from people, if it's causing you to feel turned against or victimized by people in a way that you didn't used to, then it's clutter. If it's helping you recognize a problem that you can solve or that you need to address, it's useful. That's basically the formula. Now, finally, emotional clutter can be the sad stories that we tell ourselves about stuff like, I was the black sheep in my family and now I can never feel like I belong, or I was rejected by my mom and I just can't have relationships. Those are things that I've believed about myself before. And thankfully, I got those out of the cupboard. And I made space for a new idea and a new experience to come in. And I get this a lot in the letters people write to me, and somebody was writing in, I spent years waiting for this girlfriend to get done with school, and then she didn't want me anymore, and they felt wronged for all those years. And it had been years and years since it had happened, and then now they could never have an education. And I'm just going to say, yeah, no, that sucks, but there was nothing stopping you from doing whatever you wanted to do with your life while you were in that relationship or now. And there are certain relationships that stop you, that do stop people. Abusive relationships, coercive ones, being trapped in terrible poverty, being incarcerated. These are some reasons why people legitimately get stuck. But a lot of times this is learned helplessness. We're like the little bird in a cage, the door's open, but we never think to fly out. Those stories you tell yourself, this cage, I can never get out, they need to be questioned. You need to ask yourself, is that true? Is that true? Is there another way? What would happen if I walked out of the cage? And the circumstances of your life, I know it's going to include some things that are hard and some things that are easy, some things that are probably never going to be solved, and some things that are just 1 second away, just one little decision away, and some things that are so massive that you don't really have control over them. But you start with the thing that you can do. You start with the thing right in front of you. People with CPTSD get overwhelmed. And overwhelm is this feeling like, I see 100 things to do. Where do I even start? You just start with the thing in front of you. One thing that you can try right now is just take a fast. Do a day where you don't talk about a certain problem anymore. You might even take a fast from thinking about it. It's, you can't totally control your thoughts, but when you notice you're thinking it again, divert your thoughts to something else. Just for a day, just to teach yourself about that space that you actually do have within you, where you're not consumed by this problem that happened, this limitation that was put on you at one time. And just see if there isn't like a little door in that cage. There's real life possibilities in front of you right now, and to see them, you might need to move past those hurts and let them recede into the past. And I keep promising you this. I will talk about how to do that, okay? But I want to talk about a couple more kinds of clutter. Relationship clutter, and I'm talking about all kinds of relationships. Friends, coworkers, family, people in the romantic category. If you have CPTSD, chances are you have a shortage of people with whom you feel safe and good and seen and heard, who get you. And you have an abundance of people you don't like, you don't want to deal with, but you're forced to see them, either because they live in the same building as you, or you feel obligated, or they work where you work, or you carry this thing like, I don't know, it's probably just me. I should keep putting up with this person who really makes me feel terrible because it's probably just me. That's a trauma thing. So relationship decluttering means you make space in your life to enjoy people with whom you have affinity. You like them, you feel good, you inspire each other, or you have a common purpose like you're working or raising children together. And you do this by gently removing people who don't really belong in your life anymore. It's better to have fewer people who are good for you than a whole bunch of people who just make you feel relationship cluttered. You don't have to have a great reason for stepping back from a relationship. It helps to have clarity, though. And if you need clarity about who those people are, my Connection Bootcamp talks about that, so you can check that out if you're interested. All right, finally, there's time clutter. And I think this one, you know what I'm talking about. That's where you take too much on. And this is the problem of overfunctioners who get their need for approval and meaning met by saying yes to things and having accomplishments and having this sense of a very colorful, busy calendar. These can be good things, but if you're not having time for friends or exercise or learning or adequate sleep or healing your trauma, then your time is too cluttered. You need some space in your life that is unscheduled, that's unspoken for, and it's open for you to decide in the moment how you want to spend that, even if it's just sitting there staring at the wall. Because it's in those down times that you can really recharge your batteries to get new ideas, you can make changes, you could do something really big with your life that you couldn't have done when you were chained up to other people's timelines and other people's agendas. And that's one of the functions of meditation, is to sort of schedule and bring in that quiet time for that new inspiration to come in. The thing is, when you stop being cluttered all over your life, openness does come, and so does responsibility. And sometimes that urge to clutter up your mind, your heart, your time, your home, it's a way to hold life away from you. It's covert avoidance is something I call that. Life is hard sometimes. It can be triggering. And for that, what you really want is boundaries and ability to make decisions and say no. But clutter, I believe, is a low-grade barrier to keep your life manageable. I'd actually put debt in that column too, like getting in debt, staying in debt. It's a way to hold life back. I have no choices. I have to stay stuck where I am because actually thinking about my next step is stressful. It's triggering, but that's not a good way to accomplish, self-care and to treat that feeling of being overwhelmed and triggered all the way. The side effects of that, it's isolation. It's getting frozen in amber instead of growing, and it's getting isolated and making everything in the end unmanageable. It gets more stressful, not less stressful when you shut life out. So even if you don't know what your next step is yet, consider just opening up to something better in your life, because there's greatness in you and it needs room to breathe and grow beyond the trauma, beyond what was done to you in the past. And one way that you can begin to step into that good energy of change and growth is by decluttering. You can start where you are with just one closet or one thing on your calendar that needs to be taken off, by ending a friendship that no longer serves you, or by letting go of an old grudge that you held against someone that really is not going to change anything whether you have the grudge or not. When you make space in your life, some old trauma-driven feelings and thoughts are definitely going to surface. And so to keep your decluttering steady and sustained and not fall back into it or start piling things up again in every sense of the word, you'll need tools to help you face and release the friction that arises, the feelings that used to get stuffed down by your inability to take action. Push it down, keep avoiding. So if you want to open up to this and be able to process those feelings that come up, one thing I recommend to you is to try my daily practice techniques. What is the biggest, most overlooked trigger for CPTSD symptoms? It's one that happens all the time, and it's a trigger for a lot of people, not just people with CPTSD. And it is hurrying. Hurrying is so normal, right? We all do it. We do it all the time. But when you have CPTSD, hurrying very easily turns into overwhelm. And though you probably think, well, it's not possible to live without hurrying and getting overwhelmed, there's so much to do, right? If you're hurrying when you're like doing your job or caring for your kids, it can trip you up and sabotage the most important things in your life because dysregulation, right? I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I gotta say, I think hurrying is a massive trigger that nobody talks about. I have it bad. When I hurry a lot, because I'm always trying to do a little bit more, I bite off more than I can chew, it gets me very, very dysregulated. Now, if you don't know about dysregulation, in a nutshell, this is a sort of a core symptom for adults who had trauma as kids and others. Everybody gets dysregulated sometimes. Most people can re-regulate fairly quickly. CPTSD means we get maybe more dysregulated and it's harder to come back. And what it is if you do a brain scan, brain waves that normally are sort of operating in sync together are kind of going all over the place. We get triggered by something kicks off an emotion, usually it's not even conscious, and things start to get discombobulated there. It can also affect vital signs. It can affect blood flow. It's no joke. It's something that's strongly impacting the central nervous system, which in turn drives all your endocrine system, your immune system, your heart rate, your breathing, and your digestion, and your emotions, and your ability to focus. So it can be very pervasive, the effect of dysregulation. The trick of healing CPTSD is to be able to go, whoop, I'm dysregulated, I'm going to pull it back right now, and to learn techniques that work for you to get re-regulated. So I noticed that hurrying and getting overwhelmed was such a huge dysregulator for me that I featured it in a major video in my dysregulation bootcamp. That's this course I offer, and if you want to see it, I'll put a link in it below. But just for now, I want to give you some tips on how to notice when the hurrying trigger is happening and how you can start to change that. So hurrying it's a common thing that people do. It's a dysregulator, but it's also just common. It's everything from trying to get out the door in the morning to driving in a rushed way, through traffic, gotta get there. Or just getting overwhelmed with everything that you're trying to get done in a day. It can definitely strike when you're helping kids or working with other people, multitasking, all that stuff. You start to hurry. It is a very normal thing that we do. And here's the thing, most hurrying comes not because of society, not because of technology, which some people might say, but it's from something more ordinary than that. And are you ready? The reason we have so much hurrying is Procrastination. It is. We all do it. Not getting up out of bed after the alarm goes off, not getting out the door or leaving enough time to get where we're going. Do you do that? I do. And what's one huge reason we procrastinate? That's right, dysregulation. So it's a vicious circle. Procrastinating, dysregulating, hurrying, dysregulating, procrastinating, and doing it again. So our minds go down that road easily, but our minds love a sense of spaciousness in time. So taking your time is wonderfully regulating. When is the last time that you took a shower and you stopped and you just enjoyed the feeling of the water? Or you brushed your teeth without a feeling of pressure to hurry up? This pushing all the time, it can overwhelm us, and overwhelm all by itself triggers dysregulation. So our minds love doing things with careful attention, but the PTSD in us feels scared of slow, mindful processes because the bad feelings might get in. Do you have that? There have been times when I stopped to think about why I was hurrying so much all the time, and the best I could come up with was that I felt like I was being chased by emotions. And so I gave a name to that feeling, and I call it feeling like I'm being chased by a pack of wolves. And funnily enough, when I sat in meditation and I imagined wolves coming and getting me, like I just let it happen, nothing terrible happened. I mean, there aren't actually wolves. It was emotion, and it might come and get me, and it was a feeling of usually sadness, and at the very worst, I might have a little cry, and then the feeling passes. Like, it's so simple, and if you can let that feeling kind of wash through you, you don't have to hurry so much. You don't have to keep running. You can kind of just take things at a healthy pace for you and for your mind. But for a long time I was running, and I hurried, and in my kind of dysregulation, hurrying makes me start losing my keys, spilling my coffee down my shirt or in the car. So then I end up way late getting to where I'm going. And one time, in a 2-week period where I was intensely dysregulated, something really bad had happened. I was really, really in my PTSD. But I drove away from the gas station with the pump still in my car. And then I also rear-ended a truck on the freeway. So talk about those brain-wavy lines like a river running over rocks. You know, it's just like, it was so hard for me to stay focused enough to do a sequence of things like pump the gas, take it out, put it back in its holder, screw the cap on, shut the door, get back in the car, start the car, drive away, pay attention to the cars in front of me on the freeway, key thing. Luckily, no one was hurt, but it was a moment, it was a couple weeks in my life that made it very clear to me that something was wrong, And in a way, I'm grateful for those times because nobody was hurt, because they propelled me to find out what CPTSD was. I ended up getting EMDR right after that period, and it did amazing things for me because I was dysregulated by some recent traumas that had happened. So you can learn about EMDR in some of my other videos on treatments. So I'll be sure to put a link to that down below too, so you can learn about treatments if you like. But when I'm dysregulated, also some other things I do is I'll start bumping my head. I drop dishes. I'll be washing dishes, and I'm not like applying pressure with my hands to them and holding them. They're just kind of slipping out, soapy dishes. And the worst of it is I can't get anything done. When I'm dysregulated, I'm sitting there and I start a task and then I distract and I go do something else. And they say that a lot of people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, once their practitioner knows about CPTSD, sometimes that may be what it is, that it mimics ADHD because of that difficulty paying attention and focusing. So the difference is with CPTSD, you can learn to re-regulate, come right back, and do things one at a time. I use a little task calendar called a Kanban flow board. I love it. And I tell you, I should get kickbacks because I always talk about this. There's a lot of Kanban tools, Kanban. And I write my tasks there and I color code them, and I pay attention to this list, like in the morning, in the evening, sometimes throughout the day. I delete things I complete. My mind loves to stay on task. It loves order. And in fact, order begets order. So the more I kind of work in a structured fashion, the less dysregulated I get. And so then more time opens up in my day to continue to have creative thoughts, or to be in touch with myself, or to be clear, like I need a cup of tea right now. I'm really thirsty. Because all that stuff just, when I'm dysregulated, I'm not in touch with myself. So the irony about hurrying is it just ends up making everything take longer. So you do have time to slow down. If you are from the United States, you will remember the kids' show, Mr. Rogers. And I've been talking about this again lately. I talked about it in the course on dysregulation. But I was talking about Mr. Rogers again for people from Australia and Europe who were on the call I was on. And he is one of the heroes in my pantheon of people who helped me survive my childhood with my spirit intact. And there's this beautiful documentary that came out a few years ago called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I highly recommend it. It was really neat for me to see that the way that he was wonderful for me was intentional, that he saw himself as sort of having a ministry to help kids who were struggling. And it worked. It worked for me. There's also a dramatic movie about him where Tom Hanks plays him, and that's called, I think, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And I loved that movie just as much. I cried. It was really nice. What a good person. My grandmother, who cared for me after preschool every afternoon when I was like 4 years old, she used to let me watch Mr. Rogers, but she wouldn't let me watch other TV shows because she said that most TV shows were too, I don't know what she said at the time, but I remember what she meant, and it was that they were frenetic. And when I watched cartoons and things, just like regular old Bugs Bunny, it got me wound up. And definitely when I was 4, she knew that I was going through trauma at home. She knew. And I was terrified of really silly things like dripping faucets. I was completely like, if a faucet had drips coming out of it, I would go into absolute panic that the whole house was going to fill up with water. Or the other thing is, and we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and in San Francisco there's very steep hills. And sometimes when you're a little kid in the back of a car and a car is going up the hill, you can't see what's on the other side. And it's not until you're totally going down the hill that you can see that it's a hill, it's not a cliff. And I would just absolutely be freaking out in the back seat that we were about to go over a cliff. And when I think about that now, I just feel really sad. I feel really sad that I thought that my parents would ever just like intentionally drive us over a cliff. So yeah, my grandmother knew, and she let me watch Mr. Rogers, and he would start each episode by walking into this fake, it was like a set. It was a TV set, but it was his home, and he would come in the door and he'd say hello, and he would sing the song that he always sang when he was coming in the door. And he would walk over to the closet, and he'd open the closet, and he would take off his sport coat, and he'd put it on a hanger, and then he would take out his sweater. It was like a cardigan sweater that he wore. I think it's in the Smithsonian now. And he'd put that on. He always had like a shirt and tie. He was like a proper 60s dude. Put on his sweater. Then he'd take a pair of sneakers out, like Keds, out of the closet, and he'd go sit down on the sofa. And he'd take off his leather shoes, and he'd put on his sneakers, and he'd tie them, and he'd sometimes have a little commentary. I'm going to tie my shoe. I'm going to tie that one. I'm going to tie that one. And it was totally mesmerizing. And it would just give me such utter peace inside to watch him do these tasks slowly and carefully. And the camera would give you this close-up view of each shoe while he tied it, so you might learn a little bit about like how to tie a shoe. And he made that show because he knew that a lot of kids were going through trauma. And this is what he did. He hung out with us for half an hour each day. And he says in the documentary, he was trying to like make you feel seen and validated. And he did. It's a great show to watch if you just want to know like how to be with kids too. How do you make a kid feel seen and validated like that? So you may have people who you loved during your own childhood, who you loved exactly because they helped you to learn to move at the right pace for your brain. Like we don't really give thanks for that very often, but there are some people who help you move at the right pace for your brain. And those people are very comforting to be around. And a lot of people, use mindfulness meditation to sort of tune in and drop back into their bodies and slowly and mindfully pay attention to what's happening around them. And this is really powerful for CPTSD if you can manage it. And that's something a lot of the leaders in the trauma movement recommend mindfulness meditation, along with some other things. I do a different form of meditation, but even if all you can do is just catch yourself when you're hurrying and go, whoa, I'm hurrying, I'm feeling really stressed right now, I'm getting overwhelmed, and then drop down just temporarily to half speed. Like you might only need to go at half speed to just finish getting something out of the drawer and shutting the drawer. But just doing it slowly so you're not just banging around and clanking your hands into things. Just slowing it down to half speed, it can sort of send a signal back to your brain to re-regulate, get you out of that dysregulation and back into a regulated state. So if you can learn to do this around hurrying or anything that gets you dysregulated and frustrated, if you can change your dysregulation, you can change the course of your whole life. It's the dysregulation that's at the root of so many childhood PTSD symptoms, including the health problems, including the cognitive problems, including a huge array of health problems. Learning to re-regulate is the number one thing you can do to start healing all these other aspects of your trauma. One of the worst wounds a parent can inflict on a child is not recognizing them as a distinct person and caring about their needs and their strengths and helping the child to recognize those things in themselves. If you didn't get that, one way it shows up is as romantic clutter, a string of half relationships that you half wanted and they half wanted you. And until you can complete that process of growing into your real self, the pattern will tend to continue. My letter today is from a woman I'll call B, and she writes, "Dear Fairy, my mother was very emotionally distant. She would crack jokes about me all the time, tell me how disappointed she was that I wasn't taller or wasn't like other girls. She wouldn't allow me to wear glasses when I needed them because she said I was an embarrassment to her family of origin. Oy vey, okay. She deprived me of clothes. I had to wear cast-offs from some relatives. My dad catered to her every whim because he knew if he didn't, he would suffer her rage. All I ever heard from him was, 'I'm doing this for your mother.' It didn't seem to matter how ridiculous or unfair that this was to all of us, my brother and I. As a teenager, I took up the baton from my dad and I became her mother. So you started mothering your mother, I guess. I would give up my time with my friends to be with her because I felt sorry for her." Aha. I was probably 25 before I had my first boyfriend, and boy, did that cause trouble. I eventually broke up with him because my mother convinced me that she was sick and I should take care of her. I was so emotionally deprived and desperate for her love that I would have done anything for her. My next relationship was with a married man. Oh, and after 2 years, when he finally got divorced, he decided he wanted to date other women. I was heartbroken. My next relationship was with a man 20 years older than me who didn't want to get married or have kids. I spent my entire 30s with him. Do you see the pattern? Then I broke up with him at 40 years old because I suddenly realized I wanted to have children. And then I met my husband on an online dating app. I thought we were the perfect match. He had never been married, but wanted a committed relationship and to have kids. So I threw myself into the relationship. After 3 months, I was pregnant, and 6 months later, we were married. That's when things really went awry. He had unresolved trauma from his childhood. He was emotionally unavailable, very controlling and sarcastic. Every effort from me to become emotionally close or to show him some vulnerability was met with superiority. We've been married 12 years now. I'm 55 and he's 59. And this summer, I finally hit a brick wall. I couldn't go on any longer, and I told him I wanted a divorce. It's been very difficult since then. He's tried to convince me that he is a changed man, even agreed to counseling with me, which didn't work. Even the counselor told me to leave him. I asked for a separation and he agreed, but then he decided to renovate our house, which I've wanted him to do for years. So now the house is in turmoil. All my personal belongings are scattered all over the living room, and it seems like everything is taking forever to finish. Boy, is that a metaphor for your situation. I really believe he's doing this so he will feel better when we divorce. He can tell his friends that he's tried to make things work with me and show them all the improvements in the home. I have a hard time even looking at him or being in the same room with him. He sleeps in his office now, thankfully. All the anger, frustration, and hurt that I have bottled up for 12 years is now at the surface and bubbling over. So this is where you come in, Fairy. During this time, I decided to do some self-care and started playing pickleball. I had always been athletic, so I found some great people to play with and became very good. During one of my practices, one of the other players asked if I would play competitive mixed doubles with him. I was thrilled. He was also very attractive, and so I was definitely flattered. We started practicing together, played 2 tournaments together, won one of them, and during this time we really got to know each other. He was easy to be with, very supportive and fun. He's 61 years old and has adult children. He talked about his past relationships and kids, and he's married to his second wife of 3 years, but he mentioned that it wasn't good. However, I didn't ask him anything about his marriage due to my current situation. I didn't want to get too emotionally involved because I felt I could do it very easily. I did confide in him that I wasn't happy either. That's the secret handshake of people trying to have an affair. However, our relationship never went beyond friendship. I was happy we were gelling on and off the pickleball court, and it gave me something to look forward to. We were even planning on playing tournaments that required travel. I was starting to visualize what it might look like, and I was really feeling excited. And then he had to go out of state on a business trip and told me he would be gone for a week. When the week was up, I emailed him. A couple days later, he responded by saying that he and his wife separated just prior to the trip, and his clients had offered him a house indefinitely. He was planning on staying there out of state until he decided where he would buy his new house. He then wrote that he enjoyed our time together and would probably get back for visits and told me I could write to him from time to time if I wanted. I was devastated. I cried all day. I guess I didn't realize how much I had come to rely on him or look forward to being with him. I responded saying I was happy he met good people, willing to help him, but was heartbroken also. I didn't promise to write or say I would look forward to seeing him if he visited. I took the email to mean he was not going to come back permanently. That was 3 weeks ago, and since then I've tried really hard to keep going. I've joined other pickleball groups. I'm watching your content and trying to be present for my 12-year-old. My husband and I have a wonderful boy together. And yet I feel totally bereft, almost as if I'm in mourning. Was this just limerence? My best friend has told me not to write to the guy who moved away, as it would amount to nothing. And also, I need to have a clear head when dealing with my husband when I'm negotiating the separation and divorce. A part of me agrees with her, and then another part thinks, but what if? I would love your insight and advice on this. Okay, thank you, B. Somehow I think you know what I'm going to say. Because I feel for you. Your childhood is awful, and you weren't loved properly. And your mother had some sort of emotional disorder of some kind. Maybe the people in the audience can chime in on that and see what was going on. But she couldn't love you properly. And then you were 25 before you had a boyfriend. And you had this whole pattern with your mom where you gave her everything. You would give up everything and she still didn't love you. Then you had a boyfriend. She really hated that. You broke up with him, I guess, because that's what she wanted. So then you got together with a married man. So what I want to talk to you about is this half relationship thing. You had half a relationship with your mom. You lived with her. Presumably she gave birth to you, but she didn't care about you. And that you kept kind of having this pattern. And I know you don't consciously go into it. None of us do. We're not trying to recreate our childhood, but there's some way that our brain just kind of glitches. We lose our ability to reason. And there's certain things that just feel normal to us because we've basically checked out of reality. We can make it work. Everybody needs love. You need love. And I can totally see why you would, try so hard to make it work. But your next relationship was with a married man. And you just said after 2 years, he finally got divorced, but he didn't want to be with you. And you were heartbroken. And you don't really reflect on that. But I just want to say, if you're trying to heal from a bad childhood, It's so important to stay away from morally bad actions. They definitely will re-traumatize you. So trying to have a relationship with somebody where the whole thing involves lying to somebody who counts on that person, it's, if nothing else, just recognize the terrible karma in it. But if you can do better than that, just recognize it's wrong and it's dishonest. And every day that you engage in a dishonest, hurtful activity towards other people, it damages you. It damages your ability to heal and to, what you're trying to heal is these subtle structures. It's like a developmental delay. If your mom had loved you properly, you would have been developing mirror neurons and a sense of trust in people and very nuanced perception about where people are coming from and whether their intentions were good or bad. And without any of that, you're blundering along trying to make a semblance of a relationship out of a non-relationship. Like this thing with the married man for 2 years. Well, obviously he could only see you on weird times. It wasn't like your birthday or Christmas or anything like that. And then, and he wasn't interested in you. That wasn't what he was after. He wanted to see other people. So then your next relationship was an older guy who told you from the get-go he didn't want to get married or have kids, and you spent your 30s with him. So right there you said, do you see the pattern? It's like, I guess so. You realized at 40 that you did want kids, so you ended it. But yeah, people who don't want to get married is a weird choice to get into a relationship unless you don't want to get married and you want a temporary relationship. So you were self-sabotaging and self-sabotaging. So you broke up with him because you realized that you did want to have children. And then this is the part where I'm like, oh, yikes. You met your husband on a dating app and 3 months later you were pregnant. Now I get that you were 40 and there was time pressure and everything. But it's so ill-advised to marry somebody after you've only known them for a short time, to get pregnant. Getting married hastily can be undone. Having a child with somebody cannot be undone. That's something that really surprised me. I ended up having 2 children with my kid's dad, and we were briefly married, but going into it, that was not at all what we intended for our relationship. It was an utter surprise. I barely knew him. And I learned the hard way that just because you're pregnant and just because they're willing to help out with the baby doesn't mean it's all going to work out. This is how people who were traumatized as kids are sort of, we cobble together life. We get the blessing of kids, at least. I'm happy for you, you have a kid, but not under the best circumstances. And it's hard. It's a very hard thing to be a divorced mom. And it was a long road for me. I loved having kids. I never even regretted it a tiny speck, but it cost me everything else in my life, And then when they were older, I was able to get married properly, very slowly. When I got married for real, it was after dating for 5 years. 5 years. And he didn't even meet the kids for the first year. So I'm just saying I can't say enough good things about going slowly as a way to get information about somebody. Because this way that he was terrible toward you, and unloving and emotionally unavailable and controlling and sarcastic, that's terrible. And had you dated him for a while, you would have known that in advance. So, all right, fate had its way with you, and now you have a kid. But here's again where you kind of lost your boundary. As you said, you told him you wanted a divorce, and you guys were talking about it, but then you say, well, then he remodeled part of the house or something, so you can't leave. And this reminds me of your house, of your family of origin, and your mom saying, you trying to set a boundary and go, I need to have my own life. She goes, oh, but I'm sick. You should feel guilty. And the same thing. This house is like sickness or something. Who cares about the remodel? It's a major decision to get out of a bad marriage. A remodel isn't going to fix it. So this is odd. Sounds like trauma-driven thinking. You said all your personal belongings are scattered all over the living room, and it seems like everything is taking forever to finish. I just don't get why you have to wait for it to finish. But all your personal belongings scattered. I think I muttered, oh, this is such a metaphor for your life. Where is your life in all this? Where is your happiness? So you have this half marriage, and then now you have a half divorce and a half separation with your husband. And what happened was you then, in a good move, tried to get into pickleball for, getting your life together, which was positive. But you ended up falling in love with a guy and had a half relationship with him. So, and I sort of said in a snarky way, you know, when he said he wasn't happy in his marriage and you said you weren't happy. And I said, the secret handshake of people who are seeing if they can have an affair. That's what it is. And it sounds like he did separate from his wife, but he did what a healthy person would do, which is not get into another relationship right away. And he, you know, did a separation. To get married and then get divorced is a really big thing and requires a cooling off period. And that I can think of exceptions where people have sailed through that, but it's rare. And for people with CPTSD and a history of making dodgy relationship choices, you need a cooling off period. So I can hear, like, you wanted to get divorced, so getting divorced takes time, and then the cooling off period takes time. Eventually, dating again could be a thing, but can I just encourage you to, when you do date eventually, to just go very slowly. And I know, like, love comes to town sometimes, and what are you going to do? You know, you just suddenly find you have these huge feelings, but you keep doing it for these unavailable men. And I know what that's like. I do have my dating course for people who are, you know, mystified. Why do they keep going for unavailable people? That is what the course is. And if you want to, you can always get the link to that course down in the description section. But what that course will teach you is to first get very clear about what you want your life to be like. Second, what do you want a potential partner, husband to be like? What are the non-negotiable characteristics? And may I suggest a non-negotiable is cannot be married to somebody else. That's not a good way to start. It's not going to work. And so if you're clearer with yourself about criteria and boundaries like that, then the minute you start feeling your heart going aflutter over some married man, you know what you do? You back away. You stop playing pickleball with that person. And that's because it leads to misery for you and possibly many others. That's why. It's the right thing to do, is to stay away. When somebody's divorced, they will get divorced. You know, when they're free for a relationship, they will not be in another relationship, and they will tell you they're interested in you, and they'll be willing to go at a moderate pace to get to know you. Especially as mature people, it becomes really clear that a hasty relationship isn't a good idea. I think the hope springs eternal that, like, well, some people have casual sex. Maybe I can too this time. Maybe I can just do that, and this time it won't devastate me. But has it ever been true? I don't think it has. Not for you, not for a lot of us. It just doesn't lead to happiness or security or love. And the road to that usually involves patience, going slowly, you know, the courage to speak up for yourself, to ask the questions that you have about the person, and the courage to break up with people who don't meet the criteria. When you want to get married and somebody says, I never want to get married, right there. Well, you don't even have to break up, because you can ask these things quite early before you're even in a relationship. You'd be amazed. I think there's this fear for those of us who were neglected as kids that if we don't compromise on everything important, we won't get any love at all, and we just have to take what we can get. That's the thinking. You know, I assume it's true for you. It's true for me and so many of us, me in the past. But boy, I had to stop doing that. I had to start valuing myself and my future and not just take whatever I could get, but actually be willing to not be in a relationship if it wasn't going to be this high standard that I knew was going to be necessary for me to be happy. And you have a kid. I had to make this decision with a kid. Once you have a kid, like, no way should you bring in a bad partner into your life. Even if they never meet that person, if they're going to, keep you in a constant state of stress and pain, that makes you, an ineffective parent. And what kids need is a happy, supported parent. That's what they need. And somebody who can role model for them how to have boundaries, how to be patient, how to carefully select who gets into their life. When you role model that for your child, you're giving them the most important thing they can have is how to live their life with self-love and self-respect. I know we can't just manufacture self-love and self-respect. It comes through actions, and you can take the actions even when you feel really badly about yourself. There's a lot of feelings to process if you had a traumatic childhood. Maybe you've tried to do that in therapy. Maybe it helped you, maybe it didn't. Here, I teach everybody this thing called the daily practice where we write our fearful and resentful thoughts, which is all the negative thoughts and feelings. They have somewhere to go, and we're able to kind of move them downstream, not bouncing around our heads and driving our decisions, but down as memories and things that we remember feeling. But we're able to start having a new day emotionally and mentally, a new day where we can have higher standards for ourselves. It takes some focus. It also really takes friends and support. You didn't mention in here whether you have much, support and friendship in your life. Getting divorced is lonely and hard and can be an ugly business. And I really encourage you to find a support group, a 12-step group. You can come into our membership. Some people who have left relationships come and join our membership just because they know this period of their life. They're going to want a lot of support. And wherever you go somewhere where people are sharing a common idea of what the tools are. I really encourage you to do that. Don't try to do this alone. A person with CPTSD all by themselves tends to make trauma-driven decisions. It's hard to avoid. That's the trouble. That's the trouble. So there is a way out. We have to be willing to come out of our comfort zone a little bit to be with other people who have our best interest at heart.